great worry about whether he can write anything else again. He moves back to the Midwest, which is really, I think, a place where he always drew a lot of sustenance. He grew up in the Midwest, and I think the Midwest is a place where he could be away from both coasts, from the kind of, David liked not being known. One of the great efforts of the biography is, how do you know a person who's worked so hard not to be known? So he eventually gets a job offer from Pomona College, and it's an interesting experience. He's been at Illinois State University, which is a good school, which happened to house the Dalkey Archive Press and a number of avant-garde publishing efforts. But other than that, was really a school where David could hide in plain sight. Nobody really understood. Richard Powers taught just down the road at the University of Chicago in Illinois, and everyone understood what it was to have Richard Powers on the faculty. But David was so weird. He was just so different from most. Illinois State University was, essentially a kind of land-grant college. I mean, not literally, but his job was to prepare. It had a huge ag department. And that was, and there was David Foster Wallace, who would, at this point he's got the bandana, he's got the slouch, he's got the Timberlake boots, Timberland boots, and he is invisible, and eventually gets hired away from Pomona. It's a great risk for him to go to one of the coasts. And it's a great risk to go where he may be known. But in 2002, he packs all his belongings up, and because he's now become he's an academic gypsy, and all, the book is punctuated by his moves from one college campus to another, and he always takes a U-Haul. But now that he's a famous writer, getting the Roy Disney professorship in creative writing, which is something you can imagine made him howl with laughter. And he joked that his chair, he made a chair, that his chair would have pictures of Pluto and Goofy on it. They sent for his stuff, and all he has to do is bring his dogs. So this is in the very minute class distinctions of academia, like he is now living large. In midsummer 2002, Wallace left Bloomington in the Volvo he bought with the last of his MacArthur money. The point of this section, by the way, is he meets Karen Green, who is a visual artist and will become the great love of his life. David had, shall we say, enormous problems in relationships, and one of the things, when you write a biography, the things that surprise you and things that you go, duh, right? So the duh moment was like Brief Interviews with Hideous Men. He was one of the hideous men that he's writing about. In some ways, he's all the hideous men he's writing about. I mean, that's to simplify a very complicated, interesting book. But at least on the level of biography, a certain level of biography, that's David. So anyway, in midsummer 2002, Wallace left Bloomington, the Volvo he bought with the last of his MacArthur money. Werner and Jeeves, his dogs, in the back. It had been 9 years since he changed jobs. The 40-year-old author was traveling with Sarah Caudle, a young mother who had been a longtime friend and was now his girlfriend. It took the couple 6 days to drive west. During the time, they ate in their motel room so that the dogs were never alone. In St. George, Utah, Wallace wanted to go to a recovery meeting. He found a listing in the phone book, but by the time the sponsor called back, it was too late. When they got to Claremont, bleary-eyed and anxious, they drove up and down the streets. The Mission-style strip malls astonished Wallace. He wondered, as he always did when faced with something new, if he had made a mistake. Wallace told Sarah Caudle he was afraid that the bland weather would sap his will to live. "What kind of zip code starts with 9, he wrote to Don DeLillo, plaintively just before leaving the Midwest. But there was posturing this time in the homesickness. In reality, Wallace's sense of being uprooted passed quite quickly. The house the college had arranged for him was pretty, on the main street and near the campus. It was fenced all in for the dogs, with lemon trees in the back and a giant palm tree Wallace happily measured to be 11.5 feet around. And I've been, Wallace was it's a big exaggerated, but it is a massive palm tree. The biggest palm tree I've ever seen. It's still there. The first few days brought a visitor, Karen Green. When Wallace was still in Bloomington, Green, a visual artist, had asked him for permission to turn the depressed person into a grid of illustrated panels. Now she brought the finished artwork along with a housewarming gift of IKEA ice trays. The story, Wallace's active anger against the writer Elizabeth Wurtzel, ends without hope. The depressed person cannot break out of the cage of solipsism that her terrible and unceasing emotional pain has placed her in. Green had reimagined the story so that in the last panel of her painting, the depressed person is cured. When Wallace saw what she had done, he was pleased. He told her that she had turned it into a story that people would actually want to read. That day in Claremont, he offered to make lunch for her. There were lamps scattered everywhere. She counted 14, and towels stretched out to dry on the furniture. The place looked to Green like an office with a laundry. His fridge turned out to contain only hot dogs and goldfish crackers. When Green asked if Wallace had mustard, he told her, "I'm not all that into condiments." They went to a park, and Warner jumped on her, this is my favorite detail, and tore out her belly button ring. She came back a few weeks later, the day before her birthday, with a mutual friend, and Wallace prepared her hot dogs and put them in the frilly paper cups that usually attire lamb chops. On the car ride west, Wallace had invited Sarah Caudle and her daughter to move in with him, but soon he called her in Illinois and said he wanted to end their contact. And when Karen Green's own marriage ended in November, Wallace offered to help. "I'll be your hideous man expert," he said, expecting that they were going to begin a relationship and determined to start on an honest footing this time. And anyone who knows Wallace realizes that with Wallace, the determination to start on an honest footing for him immediately presented the possibility that actually this was just a newer and more ingenious form of dishonesty. Like, if I made you feel I'm honest, isn't that just a better way to sucker you? And therefore make you even less honest than the person who just admits he's dishonest. Anyway, he wrote a series of letters called Grim Letter 1, Grim Letter 2, Grim Letter 3, where he laid out his psychiatric history and his history with women. "I don't want to be Satan," he explained. Karen Green drew a picture of Satan on him with a Sharpie, and at his insistence, added the words, "But I mean well." Soon Green invited him to spend Christmas with her in Hawaii. He was sad. Jeeves had just died. "The closest thing to a child that I had," he wrote his friend Brad Morrow. To make sure they would get along when they got there, before they went, he had visited her for a day in Marin County where she lived. They had fun, and he amazed her afterward by writing a letter describing every detail of her house, down to the paint-splattered shoes in the hallway. He told her the depressed person was really him. Wallace wanted to go slow, so to encourage him in Hawaii, and anyone who's read the book up to this point, you've got to be howling at this. Wallace wanted to go slow, so to encourage him in Hawaii, Green sent him a bedsheet with a hole already cut out. In December they left, surprising Wallace's friends who knew how little he liked to travel. He wrote some wonderful material on how being a traveler was, I think the phrase is ontologically odious, if that ring a bell. In Hawaii they watched movies and walked on the beach and talked constantly. Green swam in the ocean while Wallace avoided the water, afraid as ever of sharks. He found the islands, though, he wrote Brad Morrow afterward, much less touristy or vulgar than I thought, and haunted and sad in a good way. He also liked that there were no bugs. Before they returned home, he asked Green if she would marry him, and that was sort of the usual timeline for David. But Green had a teenage son, Sterling, who danced, and she wanted to be near a good ballet program. On his return, Wallace told a friend that he was pretty much hopelessly in love with a female in Marin County who's a showing painter. I have no idea why he wrote it that way. A female in Marin County who's a showing painter. Wallace settled into Claremont. He found a recovery group he liked, and touched by California culture, drank what he called his breakfast vomit. That's, protein drink. Lifted weights, ran with Werner, and even bought a new tennis racket. He festooned his walls with shark attack clippings and pages of The Long Thing, which is what he called The Pale King, the novel he had been working on for nearly 6 years already. When school began, he found he liked teaching at Pomona more than he had expected. For one thing, there were no graduate students, and thus no budding literary theorists. And the undergraduates were more capable than those in Illinois State. He was, in the land of 600 SAT scores, apparently, as he described Pomona to Brad Morrow. He found Rena Fraden, the department head, exactly how he'd hoped she'd be. They soon had a standing date to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer every Tuesday night at her house. And that was really what he wanted from his friends in academia, is he wanted people who would be willing to keep him company. I mean, anyone who would go to a movie with David and not talk about literature would immediately become his best friend. The second they would talk about literature, he'd head for home. He didn't really want to be crowded. And I think that's one reason that the Midwest appealed to him so much, literally. As ever, Wallace tried to tamp down any sense that he was special. When the students in his fiction class had a dress like DFW day, he let it be known that it was only sort of funny. Best of all, he only had to teach one course each semester and never had to sit on a committee. Any grumblings among the faculty, for whom undergraduate education was a calling, were soon laid to rest as word of Wallace's unmistakable dedication to teaching emerged. For example, the 11 impromptu mini-papers he required from students in his class, Literary Interpretation, or the comments in different colored inks for each reading that he scrawled in the margins of student stories. He would do three passes on any story, no matter how. I mean, anyone who's taught knows that a lot of students really, you know, their efforts are pretty perfunctory, but David never acknowledged that. So he would do one draft when he met the story, one draft which would really be about suggestions for the story, and then one draft as if the story was about to enter publication. He was sort of copy editing it, which, I mean, for some student work, you know, really kind of an odd outpouring of effort, but it was how David connected with the students. He took teaching seriously and made sure his students did so too. His grammar obsession quickly became well known. On a scale of 1 to 10, this is an 11, he would tell students, seeing a particular blunder, or this actually hurts my brain. He would consult his mother's book. His mother was a grammar teacher in Illinois. He would consult his mother's book, Practically Painless English, to answer any challenges, and would sometimes trot out her old trick of fake coughing when a student fell into a grammatical error. So for instance, you know, he'd say, oh, last night I felt really, really nauseous, and David would be like, just like his mother would, and then the student would go, oh, I mean nauseated. That was an absolute obsession of David's. He used the modifier only in class to show the power careful usage would wield. You've been entrusted to feed your neighbor's dog for a week while he, the neighbor, is out of town. The neighbor returns home. Something has gone awry, and you are questioned. I fed the dog. Did you feed the parakeet? I fed only the dog. Did anyone else feed the dog? Only I fed the dog. Did you fondle, molest the dog? I only fed the dog. His voice crackled with pleasure as he spoke the last line. Thank you.